Daniel declares probation is closing. Students of prophecy have always known that the books of Daniel and Revelation are heaven's gift to reveal the future to those living at the end of the world. The closing verses of Daniel 11, with its talk of a king of the north and a king of the south, has long been presumed to occur in the future. Now, increased light has revealed that all of the prophecies contained in Daniel 11 are not future incidents, but rather are events that have already occurred. This means that probation for some could be closing in the next few months. 1. The King of the North. 2. The King of the South. 3. The Willful King. Daniel 11 lays out a series of events that culminate in a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation even to that same time. The action begins with a willful king who does battle with the king of the south and later the king of the north. And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself, and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all. But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver and with precious stones and pleasant things. Thus shall he do in the most strange holes with a strong God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall enter into countries, and shall overflow and pass over. He shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hands, even Edom and Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy, and utterly to make away many. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. The end of the world is not just a point in time. It is also a series of events. During this process, a number of things must occur. The king of the north, the king of the south, and the willful king were all powers, raised up by Yahuwah to do an appointed work at an appointed time. The identity of these three powers is of great significance to those living on earth at this time. Knowing who they are reveals where we are in the stream of history. The king of the north is the Ottoman Empire. The king of the south is Egypt. The willful king is Napoleon, France. The willful king. The willful king who exalted and magnified himself above every god, who honoured the God of forces and a God whom his fathers knew not, is none other than Napoleon Bonaparte and the country of France. Napoleon was raised up by Yahuwah to act an important part in closing events. On February 20th, 1798, General Louis-Alexandre Berthier, acting on Napoleon's orders, took Pope Pius VI a prisoner. This was an incredibly audacious act, one unheard of and completely unprecedented up to that time. Kings had trembled at the displeasure of popes. Despite being Holy Roman Emperor, Henry IV had knelt in the snow for 3 days before Pope Gregory VII would forgive him for calling the Pope a false monk and a usurper. Napoleon did more than sling words. He actually took the Pope prisoner. This daring move marked the end of 1,260 years of papal domination, prophesied by Daniel. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand until the time and times, and the dividing of time. John the Revelator had predicted the ending to this long time span, declaring, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wandered after the beast." A deadly wound was inflicted upon the papacy when France, the willful king of Daniel 11, took the Pope a prisoner. It brought to an end 1,260 years of papal dominance and started the time of the end. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, the willful king. In the same year that France took the Pope prisoner, the very year the time of the end began, Egypt, the king of the south, fulfilled prophecy and pushed at France, the willful king. Egypt, under the rule of the Mamluks, had virtually destroyed French trade with Egypt. Egypt's destruction of her trade with France was not a huge offence. Egypt merely pushed at France. France's response, however, set off a long chain of reactions with some very unintended consequences. Just months later, on July 1st, 1798, Napoleon led an invasion of Egypt. He assumed the Ottoman Empire would be grateful at best, neutral at worst, for the French overthrow of the Mamluks, who themselves had previously fought against the Ottoman rule. This rather naive assumption was proven false when, on August 1st, 1798, British Admiral Horatio Nelson destroyed the French fleet. Any real chance that the Ottoman Empire would accept the French conquest ended after Nelson destroyed the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile. British diplomacy at Istanbul was now able to steer the empire toward outright opposition, and on 9th September 1798 the Ottoman Empire declared war on France. Napoleon now had to face the real danger of invasion by land and by sea. 2 Ottoman armies were to be involved in the invasion. The army of Damascus was to advance through Syria and Palestine and attack Egypt across the Sinai. Another army, to be formed on Rhodes, would, with the protection from the Royal Navy, land near the Nile. The French would be surrounded and outnumbered. This was a complete fulfillment of Daniel 11:40-41. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, and with horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall enter into the countries, and shall overflow and pass over. He shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. Many countries were overthrown, and Egypt ended up paying a tribute to the Ottoman Empire in accordance with the sure word of prophecy which had declared, "The land of Egypt shall not escape, but he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt." Russia and Persia, neighbouring the Ottoman Empire, began annexing parts of the empire bordering their territories. This enraged the Ottoman Empire, which reacted with great anger, eventually leading to the genocide of the Armenian Christians under suspicion that they had aided Russia. According to the International Association of Genocide Scholars, more than 1 million Armenians were exterminated through direct killing, starvation, torture, and forced death marches. The Ottoman Empire, the King of the North, did indeed go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many, yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. Only a few years later, the King of the North came to his end, and none helped him. Just as Napoleon was the sword of Yahuwah to give a deadly wound to the papacy, Mustafa Kemal was raised up by Yahuwah to give Islam a deadly wound. Kemal was a war hero in the Turkish War of Independence, driving the British, French and Greeks from Turkey. Kemal used his popularity to establish the Republic of Turkey and was its first president. Kemal was a brilliant strategist and a skilled statesman. He wanted to modernize Turkey, and he did this by divorcing her from the Islamic religion that had been an integral part of the Ottoman Empire. Kemal and his associates started to publicly question the value of religion and held the view religion was not compatible with modern science and secularism was imperative for modernity. Thus, Kemal's regime began step by step to implement the Kemalist ideology with a radical reformation of the Turkish society with the aid of modernizing Turkey from the remnants of its Ottoman past. One of the first things Kemal did was to abolish the Ottoman Sultanate and transform the Caliphate into a mere figurehead. The Caliphate had existed since the death of the Prophet Muhammad and was revered as a religious authority by Muslims in many different countries. Within a year and a half of eliminating the Sultanate, Kemal abolished the Caliphate as well. The incredible reforms initiated by Kemal were very far-reaching and were completely unprecedented. No Muslim in a Muslim country had ever brought about such reforms. To name just a few of the reforms Kemal propagated, the constitution of the Republic of Turkey was changed so Islam was no longer the state religion. Sharia law was replaced with European legal codes. Women's hijabs were ridiculed and banned from all public buildings. The solar Gregorian calendar replaced the lunar Islamic calendar. Religious schools were closed. The Ministry of National Education oversaw all religious instruction. The government seized over 70,000 mosques and restricted the building of new ones. The confiscated mosques were converted to museums or were used for secular purposes. The government appointed muftis and imams and kept oversight of them. The Muslim call to prayer was banned in Arabic. Henceforth it must be made in Turkish. The weekend no longer included Friday, the traditional Islamic day for prayers. Instead, the weekend followed the European example of having Saturday and Sunday for days off work. All of these reforms worked together to effectively erase Islam from the lives of the everyday Turks. Despite the best efforts of religious-minded Turks to preserve their heritage, language and religion, the government's pressure to adopt secular ideas was too much. For over 80 years, Turkish government remained vehemently secular. Attempts to bring back Islamic values into government have been met with resistance by the military, which views itself as the protector of Kemal's secularism. Like the papacy before it, the Ottoman Empire and Islam in general had received a deadly wound at the very time prophesied in Daniel. the king of the north had come to his end and none helped him. The very next verse is of staggering import. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. At what time? When the king of the north came to his end. At that time the time of trouble began. 1922 was an extremely important and significant year in the stream of prophetic history. In 1922, the Ottoman Empire, with its influence over all of Islam, was ended. The king of the north had come to his end with none to help. In that very same year, Pope Pius XI ascended the papal throne. Almost to the very day 7 years later, Benito Mussolini and Pope Pius XI signed the Lateran Treaty. The Lateran Treaty recognized papal sovereignty over the Vatican City and secured full independence for the Pope. The treaty gave the city of Rome a special character as the center of the Catholic world and place of pilgrimage. For the first time in history, the Pope held an overtly political position. He was the King of Vatican City. At the very time the King of the North came to his end, the time of trouble began when the papacy's deadly wound was healed. When the deadly wound was healed, the count of the 8 kings spoken of in Revelation 17 verses 10 to 11 began. There can be no doubt that the fall of the Ottoman Empire in 1922, dovetailing with the start of the count of the 8 kings, perfectly fulfills Daniel 11 verse 45. The time of the end began in 1798 when the papacy received a deadly wound. The time of trouble began in 1922, at the very year the King of the North, Ottoman Empire, came to its end, and the first of the 8 kings ascended the papal throne, preparatory to the deadly wound being healed. Many have assumed that the period of time when the 7 last plagues are poured out is the only time of trouble referenced in Scripture. However, the time of trouble spoken of in Daniel 12 verse 1 is much broader. While it does include the 7 last plagues, it also encompasses time since 1922. More people have lost their lives during the 20th century than at any other time period in history. War. World War II killed more people, about 60 million, destroyed more property, disrupted more lives, and probably had more far-reaching consequences than any other war in history. The devastation wrought on the human race during the 20th century is unprecedented in world history. Never before in history have we had 2 such devastating wars within 100 years. Between the 2 world wars, we have the Russian Civil War, costing up to 9 million lives, and before that the Mexican Revolution in 1911, which killed 2 million. In 1950, the Korean War killed 3,500,000, then we had Vietnam with 6,020,000. The Second Sudanese War from 1983 to 2005 costing 2 million. The Iran-Iraq War of 1980 to 1988 with 2 million. The Second Congo War of 1998 to 2003 with 5,400,000. The War on Terror itself has claimed more than 4 million lives. When you add the figures together, the total is 146,920,000. This makes the last 100 years the deadliest century in history. Just from the warfare, and there were many more conflicts during this time that we didn't even mention. To put these figures in perspective, consider that the 19th century saw about 82 million deaths from warfare. 60 million of these were from the Taiping Rebellion in China in the 1860s. Also consider that the Crusades, which covered a span of 200 years, killed up to 9 million, and the Mongol invasions lasted for 300 years and killed up to 60 million. Famine. But these statistics reveal only deaths due to war. Stalin's terror famine, an artificially created disaster, claimed over 17 million lives in 1932 to 1933 alone. The Great Famine of China, which took place from 1958 to 1961, is one of the greatest tragedies in recorded history, killing between 14 and 40 million people. The typical estimate is generally placed around 30 million people. To compare this number with other major human death tolls, World War II may have killed 80 million people in total. But while these people were starving, information about the famine was greatly suppressed, and what did get out about the harvest figures was manipulated. And these are but two of the many famines the world has seen since 1922. Disease. Hundreds of millions have died due to disease since the time of trouble began, and despite medical advances, the diseases are getting more virulent and harder to treat. Natural disasters. So-called natural disasters have claimed the lives of hundreds of million more. The suffering experienced boggles the mind. The new norm is record-breaking extremes in heat, in drought, in cold, in hurricane strength, in precipitation. There were only 78 natural disasters reported in 1978, as opposed to 348 in 2004. And in the years since then, the numbers have skyrocketed, as have the deaths from these events. Truly, the years since 1922 have been a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation even to this same time. It is during this time of trouble that Michael stands up. Scripture records, "And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people." The act of Michael standing up signifies that probation is about to close for all of humanity. It is a judicial act signifying that the door of mercy has closed. Pope Francis, the 8th and final king, is an old man in poor health. He does not have many more years left to live. And yet, the prophecies of Daniel reveal probation closes during his pontificate. The warning is therefore clear. Probation will close sooner than anyone can imagine. Probation closes first with those who have had the most light. Once sealed, they will take the final warning to those who have never heard or understood the truth. The Apostle Peter warned, "But the day of Yahushua will come as a thief in the night, in the which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat, the earth also, and the works that are therein shall be burnt up. Seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons ought ye to be in all holy conversation and godliness, looking for and hasting unto the coming of the day of Yah, wherein the heavens being on fire shall be dissolved, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat? Wherefore, beloved, seeking that ye look for such things, be diligent that ye may be found of him in peace, without spot and blameless." Now is the most solemn time in which to be living. There are very few events left before Yahushua is seen in the clouds of glory. The only thing standing between the earth and the final test is the falling of the trumpets. Under these dreadful judgments during the first woe, demons will pose as aliens and invade earth, causing widespread terror, panic, and pain. In the ensuing panic, Pope Francis, as a widely respected religious leader, will be exalted to be the head of the new world order, as foretold in Revelation 17. At that time, Pope Francis and the allied powers of evil will wage the fiercest war ever seen against Yahuwah and his law-abiding followers. The false Sabbath will be enforced, and the true Sabbath will be outlawed throughout the countries of the world. The time for character perfection is almost over. Every sin and defect must be overcome now. All who love Yahuwah will surrender fully to him and be cleansed of every defilement. All will make self-sacrificing efforts to win the lost to him. The end is here. Yahushua is on his way. Get ready. Get ready. You are almost out of time.